Jake from Stay Fun, and I've got an exciting new tool here from ARCCAPTAIN Welding. This is their MIG200 multi-process welder, and it is going to be helping out a lot with the floor pan replacement in this Buick. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the welding that this thing can do. So this here is the ARCCAPTAIN Welding MIG200. It's a multi-process welder capable of gasless flux core welding, gas MIG, stick welding, TIG welding, and aluminum with a spool gun. Now, some of the features of this are it has a synergic mode, which can actually help dial in the voltage, amperage, and wire speed on your MIG welding. That's great for people like me that aren't pro welders that need some help in that area. Because I tell you what, using one that didn't have the synergic mode beforehand, I was messing up all the time. And that will be very obvious in my Buick video because the trunk pan is, well, it's a bad welding job. But now that we've got this upgraded machine that kind of handles some of the unknowns for me, I'm gonna be able to zap in the actual floor pans of this thing a whole lot better. Now, I'm not just gonna talk about this, we're actually gonna show you. It comes with a MIG torch, it comes with a stick clamp and the ground clamp. It's kind of a nice ground clamp. It's got the copper strap in between the two. So that's actually more than what I had before. It also comes with all of the rollers you could need for flux core and all of your different solid core sizes as well. Now, with this, I'll be able to show you the flux core welding, the gas MIG, and the stick welding on some of these trial cubes. This is where I'm kind of learning a little bit. It's not cleaned up. This is a very rough welding that I've done here, but I have tested the flux welding and the stick welding on this, and I've got to say, for me, these welds are looking pretty dang good because I am not a welder at all. All right, so inside the welder here, I've got some flux core wire. What happens is, and when I change this out, I can show y'all, but this right here is your tension on the wire itself. You loosen that up, flop it down, this plops out of the way, and you can feed the wire into the roller here. So right there is the roller that we'll actually end up needing to change when we go between the flux core wire and the solid wire. So that's the MIG setup here. Go ahead and close that back up. Power switch for this thing is on the back side. And when you power this on, it does remember its last state. It has a few different modes. When you toggle through the model button, that goes between MIG, stick welding, TIG welding, and aluminum MIG. Now this is with a spool gun here. In the MIG mode, you can change the type of wire that you're running. So CO2 gas wire, mix argon CO2 gas, flux core wire. You can select the CRNI for stainless steel wire. And supposedly, you can actually run aluminum through the MIG gun. I don't know that you'll be able to really get it to push through the gun very well, but that is a selectable option on here. Some of the other options with the MIG torch is the size of the wire. So if we go back to gas core wire, you've got your sizes in metric. So 0.6, 0.8, 0.9, and 1.0. And how those convert to imperial, you know, 023 and 030, 035, that I'm probably going to have put on a cheat sheet on the inside cover, just because I'm not familiar with sizing in metric versus imperial. Some of the other options in here are the type of MIG gun that you want to use. So hold the trigger down, the MIG gun's running. Oh, wrong button. You can set it to where you pull the trigger and it latches it on, you pull the trigger and it pulls it back off, or a spot weld function. So this is actually probably going to be extremely helpful when I'm trying to do the welding of the floor pans, because I can set it to a very specific time delay of run a spot weld for a second, and it will run 1 second every time I pull and hold the trigger. Then it stops, I let go, I move down, I pull and hold the trigger again. Another great tack weld. Some of the settings to actually configure the time delay are when you're in the spot weld mode, you press the little play button, and that's the number of seconds. You dial that up or down, and then you're good to go. So for this, I am actually gonna start out with spot welding. So I'm gonna leave that on a 1 second delay. I'm gonna set it up for the flux core wire. I am using 0.8 or 30. To dial this in, you have an impedance setting here. I don't exactly know how impedance changes it, so I just leave that at standard. The middle selector modifies, are you running a little hot or a little bit cold? So you do a little test section. If you need a little bit more heat, you turn that dial on up. It sets your voltage and your wire speed all automatically. If you need a little bit less heat, you turn it back down. If you're actually more used to welding and you have some preferences on your voltage, you can actually dial the voltage in. On the left-hand knob, you can say, hey, I want to run 3 volts less, or all the way up to 3 volts more than what the automatic setting is. I'm not experienced, so I'm just gonna leave that back at 0, and we'll run it how it thinks it needs to be ran. So now that we've got this kind of set up, why don't we go ahead and get to actually welding one of these blocks. Got my cooter snot on there. So cooter snot's just basically a little jelly that kind of protects the tip of the MIG gun so that the splatter doesn't come back and, you know, bite you in the butt there. So now that we've got that on there, we can go ahead and get some of these squares set up to tack. So I'm gonna take 2 of them, a couple magnets, and let's get this ready to tack down. All right, so we've got that magnet right in place. I should be able to throw a nice little tack weld on there, and then we can pull a bead across it. Go ahead and throw a fire retardant jacket on just so I don't hurt myself, burn my arms or anything like that. Time to weld. There's a 1-second tack. I was a little offset because I am not any good. There we go, that's a little better. I think we could probably use a little bit more amperage there. Let's go ahead and crank that on up to 70 and see what happens. We'll go ahead and change this off of the spot mode back to single trigger type. Take my magnet off now that we got it tacked together. See if we can run a bead. Well, I think that went pretty well. Let's see how hot that is. Yep, still way too hot to touch. I'm pretty happy with that though. I started off not so great, but it ran a pretty good bead after that. I was just doing a little zigzag pattern. And for flux core, that's pretty impressive to me. Maybe I've just been using it wrong all these years. I finally got a welder that can work right. Let's go ahead and try and stick all these other pieces on there without burning our hands too much. Get them tacked in place, and then we'll weld the whole thing out. I don't have enough room to work with here. Gotta get creative sometimes. So far, so good. So partway through that, I actually turned the spot weld mode up to 1.5 seconds, and that helped out a tremendous amount with making sure that I got good penetration on both pieces of metal. Before, it would kind of arc to one and I didn't have time to really pull the 2 of them together, especially where I had a little bit of a gap going on. A little bit of the ability to, you know, modify how long that dot is, that tack weld is, really helps out because each of those tacks is fairly consistent. I'm not blowing through on one and then barely tacking another. I can dial it in to actually be able to tack it the same way on each spot. I'm gonna let that cool for a little bit, and then we'll go through and we'll do a full welding pass on each of those lines. I'll probably go from one side to the other piece of metal. That way I don't warp it too badly. It is just a cube, so I'm not overly concerned about it. If I was doing this on, you know, the floor pan, I'm gonna have to go in stretches, you know, small little stitch here, go across the floor to another spot, let it cool off, all that good stuff. I will have a video out on this when I get these floor pans replaced by using this ARCCAPTAIN welder. By the way, ARCCAPTAIN did give me this very nifty auto darkening welding helmet. It's a fashion statement. It's actually extremely nice for being able to weld this because major upgrade here. Being able to see what you're about to weld and then continue to see it after you've started welding, major bonus. The auto darkening feature is really quick. It's got a very large viewing angle, which is great. It's also just kind of clear. I can actually see what's going on, which is just amazing in comparison to the Hobo Freight one that I was using before. Thanks, ARCCAPTAIN. Looking pretty good, even if I do have to say so myself. Let's turn my helmet a little bit darker. It has that type of setting on here. It's got a weld setting, grind setting, delay for turning back off, and then a sensitivity setting so that if you're doing something that requires less light, but you still want it to darken, you can set that sensitivity real high. Well, it is a little bit darker for sure. Man, how many more of these we got? That's everything. Alrighty, this guy's cooled down pretty good now. Looking at some of the actual welds themselves. I mean, obviously they still got slag and crap on them right now. I haven't cleaned them up at all. But at least this part looks good. Let's go ahead and scrub them off, take a look, and then we'll grind them down and take a look. Alright, so I was going to grind down all of the welds, but then I decided, you know what, it might be nice to be able to compare a couple of them. So here we have a weld that I've ground down, and I'm not exactly a grinder, but I think that turned out quite well, especially for the price point of this welder. So looking at the welds themselves, I'm actually pretty happy with them. They all seem to be fairly consistent, and the fact that I'm able to get the consistency out of it using that synchronous function where it sets wire speed for me and voltage and all of that stuff. I hit it, I turn it up a little bit, hit it again, good to roll. Zap through all of it, and it did really well. Nice even beads. I could keep my tempo because I didn't have any issues with the arc blowing out or the ground not working correctly or anything like that. And I mean, I know I wasn't doing the best job with grounding because I have it attached to a piece of sheet metal, and it's just a small piece of metal sitting on top of the splatter. Overall, that's really good for me, especially with flux core. So now that we've got that one out of the way, let's go ahead and show you how to convert this thing over to stick welding, and then we'll get the stick welder going. So the first thing to do to convert it over to stick welding from MIG is to disconnect the MIG torch. This little loop back right here is actually the MIG torch connector, and since I was in gasless flux core welding, I had the torch tied to the negative and the ground clamp tied to the positive. Now I'm going to be stick welding, so I need to move this ground clamp, and these are just twist in DINS, I think it's called a DINS 50. So I'll move the ground clamp over to the negative, and then we pull our stick torch out, get yourself a rod and your clamp, and then you're ready to weld. Check out this clamp, it's actually pretty decent. It's got a good spring tension on it. It's got good sets for the sticks to actually go into, and it's been working really well. I've actually used this already to help weld in a hitch receiver into the bed of my dually so that the companion fifth wheel hitch that I've got will slide down in there. And that was welding through a thick piece of through steel there, and it did really well with penetrating the steel, getting a good hot weld. Did both top side, bottom side, no problems. So we'll get this thing ready, dialed in, and let's do one of these cubes. Turn the machine on. It's gonna remember we were in Flux MIG. So now, punch this sucker over to stick, and all you got is your amperage reading. Turn that up or down. So I know this is pretty thin metal. We'll go ahead and turn it down some and adjust from there. All right, there we go. That's a pretty good start. Ready to go. Woo! Not too bad. If I would feed it fast enough, I guess. So that weld pool kind of fell down. Got a gap I'm gonna have to fill over here. Nice and clean, stop, start. This thing's doing pretty good. So far so good. see if we can run a couple stitches across it. Well, it was pretty difficult from standing way far back, but it's still there. We'll do these a little bit more close up. You know, I'm kind of curious now. I haven't done this yet, but maybe I should try welding vertically on this next stitch. We'll see how it does when I'm trying to pull the pool up. Then we'll do another one where I'm pulling it back down. Burn a hole in it. Well, going up obviously didn't work very well. Obviously, that's not the welder's fault. That's just me testing things and trying to see what a stick welder can even do. I guess we'll give it a try going downward. Alrighty, we'll go back to welding across the top. That's a lot of material. All right, so we've let it cool off, and we've actually got some of the slag off of it actually fell off on its own, so that's kind of cool. I'm gonna go through, they actually provide this little hammer. I know it's a rinky-dink hammer, but I'm gonna use it anyways. It's got a hammer on one side, brush on the other. We'll go ahead and try and knock some of this slag off and clean it up a bit. We'll take a look at what they look like. Well, that's not too bad. I mean, look, it came off in pretty good chunks on some of that. And honestly, most of these welds aren't terrible. I'm not very good at stick welding. And when I tried to go vertically up, it kind of wanted to stack. I think this was also the area where I had a little bit of gap. Then when I tried to go vertically down, I ended up with a blowout as well. So not so good vertically, but that's probably either material or electrode or my style. Who knows? Going across the tops though, some of those actually look pretty decent. Some of them I obviously hung around a little bit longer, and I was trying to just see what it does. Trying to learn a little bit honestly about if I stay a little bit longer, how much more does it build up the weld, and it builds it up pretty good. If I run it across kind of quickly, it actually performs a pretty decent weld there. I might want to know this. I was running 6013 16th inch, that's 11 gauge steel. They're just little practice squares. And I'm getting practice, and I'm enjoying it too. This thing's doing well. Now I guess it's time to go ahead and convert it over to gas MIG. I'm gonna be using some 023 wire, and I do have CO2 gas, not mix. So we'll see how that does against this 11 gauge steel. Alrighty, so one of the first steps is probably gonna be to get the old flux core wire out of the machine. So let's go ahead and open this sucker up. Here's your tensioner. So we'll go ahead and loosen that up where we can flip it down, and now the rollers come up out of the way. Now this is the flux core roller that we got down here, and to replace it, loosen that sucker up right there, pull this wheel on off, then you will find the roller that you need. So I'm going to be running 0.6 or 023. When you're looking at it, the 0.6 side, the 0.6 groove for me needs to go to the back side of the machine. Tighten this sucker down. Good to go. So I am going to try my best to wheel all of the flux core back out, just because, you know, I'm cheap like that, and try and save as much as I can. That off, taping it outside here. The 023 spool is a 10-pound spool, 11 pounds. They have this nice adapter that goes in to the 10-pound spool. Oh, fits on the spool holder. One nice thing about the 10-pound spool is once you get the tension set, you don't mess with it again, because the tension stays on there, the spool can come off. All right, so before we can run the wire through the gun, we need to change out the contact tip on the MIG stick. Now, one not so great feature is that this is a press-on or a friction fit tip here. So it just pulls right off, and then there's your contact tip. It's at least screwed in, and it is a Tweco style. I recently learned that the hard way trying to fit a Miller in there, and it didn't work. So make sure you get Twecos. Unscrew the Tweco from the flux core you were using, and before I put the new 025 in, now that it's a free feeding feeder, I'm gonna go ahead and run the wire through. I don't know if that's required, but I noticed that it helped a lot when I was trying to feed my flux core through. So contact tip out, feed some wire in, and then we'll put the contact tip in. Feed that through, line it up with the groove. Then we'll go ahead and clamp our roller down. And I'm gonna go ahead and set the tension back down. 4. 4 sounds like a good tension spot. All right, we'll go ahead and turn this back on. Set it to MIG mode, and then run the wire through. Now, when it realizes that you've been holding it for a while and not sparking anything, it does speed up the wire speed so that you can actually feed it through your gun a little bit more efficiently than trying to sit there and wait for it to slowly go through. There it is. Now that I got my wire feed out, take my contact tip, thread it through. That way I know it doesn't accidentally jam up at the end of this gun. Screw that on, a little bit of cooter snot. Got my cover back on, a little bit of cooter snot on it. Now all that's left is hook up the gas, get yourself some metal, and start welding. All right, so on the gas side of things, it does come with a pretty decent length of gas line that connects from the back of the welder itself to your regulator. Now you're gonna have to provide the gas and the regulator itself, but the line to the machine and after it gets to the machine all the way out to the end of the TIG or the MIG torch, that's all handled by the ARCCAPTAIN welder package. So with the welder on, I'm using O23 gas, so we're gonna go to CO2, because that's my gas. And then the diameter of wire is 0.6. And then I should be able to pull it and test and see how much flow I got. My understanding, about 20 to 25 is a good flow rate. So, well, that's about 30. That's a pretty good amount. All right, and don't forget, when you're transitioning from flux core to solid core wire, you wanna make sure that you change your polarity back to where the MIG whip is plugged into the positive down here, and the ground clamp is plugged into the negative. Alrighty, let's get a couple of these suckers stuck together. We'll go ahead and drop this over to spot weld. That way we get a consistent tack, ready to go. Tacks are kind of bubbly. Kind of tried to stretch my tack out a little bit so it didn't caterpillar up as bad. Looks a little bit better. Not bad. I got a little bit of a gap I'm gonna have to fill in here, but as much as that was caterpilling, it shouldn't be too big of a deal, I don't think. So I think what I might actually do now, just to see what the spot welding thing can do, I might actually turn that down to, I don't know, maybe half a second, and I'll just spot weld all the way down one of these stitches just to see what it would look like. So I think that might be useful if you were actually doing like some very thin sheet metal work, where you need a nice consistent but very light tack all the way down, little stitching or whatever. That way it doesn't burn through the metal. That's not too bad. Let's go ahead and, since this is thicker metal, let's weld it like you should. Pop that over to regular welding mode. Off we go. That's pretty clean. That's a lot of extra on the top of there, but not bad. That probably means I can move a little faster. I was trying to do a nice slow zigzag pattern, but let's see what we do if we go a little bit quicker. Now the welders in y'all might be saying, that sounded a heck of a lot better. I'm saying that too, that looks a whole lot better. If it was popping like that, maybe you just need a little bit more power, because that seemed to weld a whole lot nicer. Let's crank it up a little bit more and see what happens. Let's go on up to 90. All right, that does not seem happy there, so we'll go ahead and turn it back down to 85. It was still kind of doing it. We'll go back on up. Why not? At this point, I'm just kind of playing around, trying to see what I can learn. That's kind of the point of the synergic mode, is you you turn up the value if you want to try and get more heat and more penetration. So I'm going to turn up the value and see if we can get it to settle down in that gap a little better. Man, that looks pretty good. If I do have to say so myself, I quite like that weld. I'm gonna go ahead and zap this whole thing out. Try grounding directly on the thing, see if it does any more better. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, for not knowing how to gas weld personally, this welder makes it a whole lot easier to do so. That synergic mode, I'm telling you, it's just, when I first laid, first bead that I laid on this thing, which was on this test piece, somewhere on this test piece, I laid a pretty decent flux core bead as my first one. And I was like, what the heck, is this how a welder's supposed to work? I mean, color me impressed. All right, so we let it cool down overnight, and I gotta say, I'm not exactly sure why it caterpillared up so much. I know some of these actually did a whole lot better than others. I don't know if that's just me not knowing, you know, what speed to run. Maybe I needed more amperage. Maybe I should have manually told it to slow the wire speed down some. I don't know exactly, but in general, it welded very well. Like, the benefit of gas welding is obviously less slag, and you can do thinner materials. So when I get around to doing the floor pans in the Buick, which will be the next video y'all see, that'll be very helpful to be able to tack together the 18 gauge floor pans without blowing through. So overall, very impressed. It did a good job of welding gasless, gas, and stick. And these welds actually look pretty decent, especially for me. A real welder could do a whole lot better. For an amateur that's going to actually be looking at this welding machine, it does very well. It makes it a lot easier to get into welding, and that's what it's all about. Getting in there, learning something new. All right, first impressions on the ARCCAPTAIN MIG200 multi-process welder, 2 thumbs up. I'm very happy with this welder. It has done a very good job for a beginner like me that's getting into welding and doesn't know how to utilize all of the different variables of voltage, amperage, wire speed, all of the confusingness of a standard welder. The synergic mode on this makes it a lot more simple. I turn it up when I don't have enough penetration. I turn it down when I'm blowing through. Easy enough for me to do, it's easy enough for you to do too. Now, we did throw together 3 different cubes here. We got the gasless flux core welds, the stick welds, and the gas MIG. Now, a lot of these welds are not the best by any means because, again, I am a beginner and I'm learning, but they're solid. They're not going anywhere. I could probably throw these at the ground and they wouldn't break. I was provided these free of charge for this video. I wasn't told that I had to make a good review. I could review it honestly, and that's what I've done here. I am seriously actually this impressed. ARCCAPTAIN was willing to give me a discount code for you guys. It's 5% off if you use code STATEFUN on the ARCCAPTAIN website. That is a one-time use per customer discount code. And I will have a link to both this welder and the welding helmet in the description below. And I will be using this welder very thoroughly to weld thin sheet metal doing floor pans in this 55 Buick Super. So if y'all are excited about seeing that, make sure you subscribe down below. Leave a comment, let me know what you think about this review, this welder, all of the stuff that I've shown. And well, y'all have a good one.